What happens when Barron Trump is kicked out of a luxury store for wearing a MAGA hat? His response shocked everyone at the store. The silver bell above the door jingled, piercing the opulent silence of La Maison Royale, the most exclusive luxury store in Manhattan. Customers who entered this sanctum of wealth did so with quiet reverence, like visitors to a cathedral. Barron Trump, tall and lean, his unmistakable face partially shadowed beneath a red MAGA hat, walked in with an air of casual confidence. His entrance caused an almost immediate ripple. Eyes darted, whispers hissed, and the perfectly curated ambiance of wealth seemed to grow tense, like a violin string about to snap. "Can I help you?" The sales associate's voice was smooth, polished to the point of insincerity. Her pearl-white smile faltered ever so slightly as she took in the young man's hat. "I'm looking for a gift for my mother," Barron said, his voice calm but deliberate, as though he'd measured each word before speaking. His gaze swept across the room. Displays of shimmering couture dresses, glass cases filled with watches worth more than houses, and handbags perched like sculptures in a museum. The saleswoman hesitated, her professional mask cracking under the weight of her judgment. "I'm not sure we have anything you'd like," she said, her voice cooler now. Barron raised an eyebrow, the hint of a smirk tugging at his lips. "Is that so?" he asked, his tone light, almost playful, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of disappointment. From behind the counter, another staff member whispered to a colleague, "That hat, it's a statement. Do we really want that here?" The colleague nodded imperceptibly, and within moments a manager appeared, her expression firm but courteous. "Sir, I'm afraid we must ask you to leave," she said, gesturing toward the door with a manicured hand. The room froze. A few customers feigned indifference, but leaned in just enough to eavesdrop. Barron didn't move. He stood tall, his presence a stark contrast to the uncomfortable shuffle of those around him. "Is there a problem with my attire?" he asked, tilting his head slightly as though genuinely curious. The manager hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We maintain a certain standard here, sir," she said, choosing her words carefully, "and we reserve the right to refuse service." A lesser man might have stormed out, fuming, but Barron Trump was no ordinary young man. He removed his hat slowly, almost ceremonially, and held it in his hands. His golden hair caught the light, and for a moment he looked like a prince from a forgotten era. "You know," he began, his voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity, "this hat represents more than you think. It's not just a symbol of politics, it's a reminder of freedom, of the right to choose, to believe, to speak, and yet here I am, being told I don't belong because of a piece of fabric." The staff exchanged uneasy glances, but Barron wasn't done. He stepped closer to the manager, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "I came here to buy something meaningful for my mother, someone who taught me to value people, not appearances. But now I see that the value of this place isn't in its price tags or its luxury. It's in how little it understands the very people it seeks to serve." The tension in the room was palpable. A woman near the jewelry counter gasped softly. A man by the watches adjusted his tie, pretending not to listen but failing miserably. Barron reached into his pocket and pulled out a slim black card, one that gleamed faintly with the unmistakable prestige of unlimited wealth. He held it up, the ultimate trump card in a place like this. "I could buy this entire store," he said, his voice devoid of arrogance, filled instead with a quiet confidence that silenced the room. "But I think I'll take my business elsewhere." He placed the card back into his pocket and turned to leave, his stride unhurried, his posture regal. But as he reached the door, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. "By the way," he said, his tone almost casual, "you might want to rethink your definition of standard. It's starting to look a little outdated." With that, he stepped outside, letting the door close behind him with a soft chime. The staff stood in stunned silence, the weight of his words sinking in like stones in a still pond. Outside, Barron slipped the MAGA hat back onto his head, the red a defiant beacon against the gray Manhattan skyline. As he walked away, a curious thing happened. One of the younger sales associates, who had watched the scene unfold with wide eyes, stepped out of the store and jogged after him. "Sir," she called, her voice tinged with urgency. Barron stopped and turned, his expression softening. "I just wanted to say," she hesitated, glancing back at the store, "I'm sorry for how they treated you. It wasn't right." Barron studied her for a moment, then smiled, a genuine warm smile that seemed to light up the cold city street. "Thank you," he said simply, and as he walked away, the young associate stood there, watching him go, a newfound respect glimmering in her eyes. Inside La Maison Royale, the velvet rope had been pulled tighter than ever, but outside, a quiet revolution had begun in the most unexpected of places. faces. The young sales associate stood frozen, her mind racing as Barron disappeared into the crowd. She glanced back at the store, where the staff buzzed in whispered tones, their faces taut with the realization that something monumental had just occurred. It was as though a mirror had been held up to their carefully curated world, and for the first time they saw the cracks beneath the polish. Barron, meanwhile, walked down Fifth Avenue with his hands tucked in his coat pockets, his breath forming small clouds in the winter air. He wasn't angry, but a quiet determination simmered within him. He didn't regret wearing the hat. It was never about making a scene. It was about being himself, regardless of what others thought. But this experience had planted a seed in his mind, one that he couldn't quite shake. He reached a small coffee shop tucked into a corner of the bustling street. The place was unassuming, worlds apart from the glitz of La Maison Royale. A bell chimed softly as he stepped inside, the warmth and smell of roasted coffee beans enveloping him. "Barron?" came a surprised voice from behind the counter. He looked up to see a familiar face. Elena, a barista he'd met during his rare visits to the shop. She was a college student, always scribbling in a notebook between shifts, her eyes full of curiosity and kindness. "Hey, Eleanor," he said, offering her a faint smile. "You look like you've had an interesting day," she said, noticing the faint crease in his brow. "You could say that," Barron replied, pulling off his hat and placing it on the counter. The sight of the MAGA logo caught her attention, but unlike the staff at the luxury store, she didn't flinch. Instead, she studied him for a moment, as if trying to piece together the story behind his expression. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching as the city moved around him. The shop was quiet, with only a few other patrons scattered at tables. Eleanor brought over his drink and slid into the seat across from him, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. "Okay, spill. What happened?" she asked, her tone gentle but insistent. Barron chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Let's just say I got a first-hand lesson in how quickly people judge." Eleanor arched an eyebrow. "Because of the hat?" He nodded, then recounted the events at La Maison Royale. He spoke not with bitterness, but with a measured calm, his words painting a vivid picture of the encounter. As he spoke, Elena's expression shifted from shock to disbelief, and finally to something resembling quiet anger. "That's ridiculous," she said when he finished. "They didn't even give you a chance, all because of a stupid stereotype." Barron shrugged. "It's not surprising. People make assumptions. It's easier than trying to understand. But that doesn't make it right," Elena said firmly. "You're just you. Why can't people see that?" Her words lingered in the air, and for the first time, Barron allowed himself to acknowledge the sting of what had happened. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the principle of it. The idea that someone's worth could be dismissed so casually based on nothing more than a superficial symbol. "I don't know," he admitted. "But maybe that's the problem. People don't take the time to see the person behind the symbol." Elena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "So what are you going to do about it?" The question caught Barron off guard. He hadn't considered taking action. He wasn't one to seek out the spotlight, but Eleanor's words stirred something in him. A flicker of purpose he hadn't felt before. "I don't know yet," he said slowly, "but I feel like I need to do something." The conversation stayed with him long after he left the coffee shop. That night, as he sat in his room, scrolling through social media, an idea began to take shape. It wasn't enough to simply walk away from situations like the one at La Maison Royale. He needed to challenge the assumptions, to create a space where people could see each other as individuals rather than labels. Over the next few weeks, Barron worked quietly but relentlessly. He reached out to a small group of friends who shared his vision, including Elena. Together, they began planning an initiative called Project Unseen. The goal was simple but profound: to host open forums and events where people from all walks of life could share their stories, breaking down barriers and challenging stereotypes. The first event was held in a modest community center with a small but diverse crowd in attendance. Barron, wearing the same red hat that had caused such a stir, took the stage to share his story. His words were raw and honest, infused with the quiet strength that had become his hallmark. As he spoke, the room fell silent, the weight of his message settling over the audience like a heavy snowfall. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. One by one, others stood to share their own experiences, stories of judgment, rejection, and resilience. The event, though small, sparked something much larger, a movement that began to ripple through the city and beyond. News of Project Unseen spread quickly, and soon Barron found himself at the center of a growing wave of support. The initiative attracted attention from media outlets, celebrities, and even former critics. The same young sales associate who had chased him down outside La Maison Royale showed up at one of the events, her eyes filled with gratitude and awe. "I didn't understand before," she told him after the event, "but now I do. Thank you for opening my eyes." Barron smiled, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. The world hadn't changed overnight, but he had taken the first step towards something bigger, something that felt meaningful and lasting. And as he stood on the stage, looking out at a room filled with people who had come together, despite their differences, he realized that the most powerful luxury of all wasn't wealth or status. It was understanding, compassion, and the courage to bridge the gaps between us.